absolutely destroying sex for so many of us. But to then have someone else step in and say, no, for me, my kinks do step from trauma, and this is the link I see inside my mind. And maybe that can help you piece together your identity as well. This one time that I was with a man who may or may not have had erectile dysfunction. I'm not sure if he was dealing with it for a very long time or if it was a recent occurrence, but it's something that happened to him when he was with me.
Hi, this is Shreen Ashton for the Global Indian Network Sexuality and Identity podcast. And today I'm very happy to have Tanisha join me. And she runs a fabulous project called Sangya. So hello, Tanisha, lovely to meet you.
Hi, Shreen, it's so good to be here.
Oh, thank you very much for joining me today. So firstly, Sangya, I think it's absolutely fascinating, the work that you're doing. But can you talk about the history of Sangya and how it was founded?
Absolutely. So Sangya Project at the moment is a brand that sells pleasure products in India and is also one of the first manufacturers of pleasure products in India. It's actually the first team to make a vibrator in India, which is something we've been really, really excited about. But that's not what it was at the get-go. When we first began, we were just a space that talked about adult conversations around sex and sex ed. What we wanted to do was talk to adults about their experiences around mental health and sexual orientation, and basically look at sex ed from what it can be outside of classrooms and what it can look like in everyday life. My background in this space is in sex education, and my original job would have been to speak to children in classrooms and sort of set up sex ed modules for them. But since there is no national program for sex ed in India, it gets a little difficult to build a curriculum that can work across different schools, across different identities and backgrounds and cultures and economic backgrounds as well. And because sex education is so informal in India, it also means that teachers and parents and other stakeholders have a lot of power when it comes to censoring the material or hiding certain subjects from their kids, because understandably they are a bit worried about what their children learn when they're not around to moderate the conversation. So my idea around that was to then take focus away from trying so hard to work with children who are extremely impressionable, and to instead work with the adults to make sure that when they are home with their younger siblings or with their own children, they feel more equipped to have that conversation directly with their children and not worry so much about whether or not their children are getting the wrong information from others outside of that safe home. So we started writing sex ed content on Instagram because it felt like a space where the censorship would be something we could manage and we could handle how the platform worked, and we would reach a lot more adults there. And before we knew it, it grew into this community effort where people wanted to not just read content on a regular basis, but also wanted to submit their own stories. So some people wanted to stay anonymous, some wanted to put their names out there, but a lot of people wanted to talk about very specific adult experiences when it comes to medical conditions that can affect your sex lives, or personal experiences and traumas and how that can affect the way you handle your relationships. And it just became such a beautiful process to see what sex ed can look like when it's not a small number of people trying to educate everyone else, and instead becomes a two-way sort of community process where all of us contribute to the dialogue at large. And I guess that is what I would say Sangya Project is. It's just a place where we recognize that no one can single-handedly be that expert or be that teacher in something that is so personal like sex and pleasure and relationships. And the best we can do is to just keep talking to each other so we can learn together.
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking on your Instagram page and website, I mean, your blogs, they're incredibly informative. You know, you're asking about things, questioning, say, do people test for STIs when they're going on dating, information about HPV and the HPV vaccine, which in the UK, that's a big topic about cervical screening, women get free national screenings as well from the age of 25, which again, I don't know whether that's a thing in India, whether you get free healthcare screenings for things like cervical cancer and obviously testing for HPV. But also just, I think what I loved as well, you've got blogs on there about rediscovering kinks as a survivor of sexual abuse. That was one of the blogs. I mean, how do you decide on the topics to feature? As you said, some people write in, but what makes you select what's important to share?
I think it's just constantly sort of remembering that I don't know everything there is to know about sex and sexuality in the world. And therefore, there will always be gaps in the knowledge that I bring to the table, because so much of that is based on my personal experiences, so much of that comes with my personal biases that I may not recognize unless someone else calls them out for me. So what helps is to actually have a community that I'm constantly speaking to and not someone who I'm lecturing at, because they feel more comfortable then in reading something that I've said and then adding on to it and saying, hey, this is a perspective you're missing, and I would love to add the story so it can help someone else as well. Like you said, the rediscovering kink, right? That's an example that is very personal to me as well. While I do write a lot of content around kink and BDSM, and I do try to create guides and informative pieces around it, it helps to have people who can very, very critically and comprehensively tie their traumas to the experiences that they currently perceive and pursue. Because I am not someone who necessarily sees that connection between my traumatic past and the kinks I now actively pursue. For me, those feel like they're slightly different worlds. But to then have someone else step in and say, no, for me, my kinks do step from trauma, and this is the link I see inside my mind, and maybe that can help you piece together your identity as well. That has been really lovely to see, because it's like a group of friends that are constantly being able to see themselves as valuable resources of information as well. So I think that dialogue between us and everyone else in the community is how we make sure that we don't miss little categories, or we don't have little gaps in the knowledge we're trying to build together.
Because ultimately, a lot of these conversations are around trust, aren't they? I think even when we're talking about having these connections with people, it's ultimately about the trust. And again, say just going back to speaking about being a survivor of the blog about being a survivor of sexual abuse and rediscovering kinks, ultimately we're having these open dialogues that people sometimes don't feel comfortable with having with a partner. And yet I think, again, just with yourselves putting these blogs and these Instagram posts out there, people might not feel so alone about and scared about having a conversation around sex and sort of sexual identity, which I think's great. And as you touched on a little bit as well, just about like your own personal experiences. I mean, talking about sex and having a profession that's around sex, do you think that's changed your perspective when it comes to an intimate relationship?
It definitely has. I think one thing that all of us have in common, even across cultures, is that we're all taught to be a certain degree of perfect in our sexual lives. There's a lot of shame around what our bodies look like or how our bodies move. There's always this desire or this expectation to perfect it even more and to be that ultimate woman or ultimate man, or just be this object that can be completely desired by the other. And I think that process often strips us of a lot of humanity, but also makes us forget to be a little kind to ourselves on days when we are just a little bit messy, or we are just a little bit injured and slow and sloppy and just, human. And yeah, I feel like in having so many different conversations with people whose experiences are often very, very different from my own, it's taught me to forgive myself for a lot of bad days as well, where there have been phases of my life where my libido has been high or low because of several reasons, or even as I age and I'm noticing slight changes in my body, slight changes in my energy levels. These are things that ordinarily would have brought me so much shame and guilt because I can feel my sex life changing in these waves. But now I have this community and I have these friends who I have such lengthy conversations with, that I'm constantly reminded that I'm just a person and that today could be a terrible day for the way my body looks or the way it feels or the way it may not inspire desire in someone who's next to me and someone who's dear to me. But there's always tomorrow, and that desire can also evolve and change form over the years because that's just what life is like for all of us. So I think that kindness towards ourselves and towards each other also has strengthened because I get to hear so many perspectives from people.
And there's so much pressure, isn't there, I think, on people, especially when we're looking at social media. Of course, we all put our best selves on there, don't we? We're not a lot of the time going to maybe upload a picture or a post when we're at our worst. I mean, some people do that, you know, to share their experiences. But again, it's just still knowing that we've got these human connections in a way as well. And as you said, having friends and people that you can actually openly have these discussions with, and they probably have felt exactly the same as you have sometimes and saying, no, this is normal, it's fine.
Yeah. One of my favorite experiences around this subject is this one time that I was with a man who may or may not have had erectile dysfunction. I'm not sure if he was dealing with it for a very long time or if it was a recent occurrence, but it's something that happened to him when he was with me. And I hadn't experienced that with a partner before. So there was a moment of panic where I didn't know how to address it. I didn't want to comfort him so aggressively that it came across as condescending. I didn't want to smother him. But at the same time, I didn't want him to think that I was completely turned off in that moment just because he was dealing with that. So I froze for a second, but this person, had immense grace in that moment, and he sat me down and he initiated other forms of sort of sexual contact and sensuality in that experience, and he just kept the energy and that connection ongoing. And I think being able to experience something like that with a person helped me also realize that conversations around something like erectile dysfunction can be so different from what they are right now, because we don't have to look at it necessarily as something that is a problem that needs to be fixed or something that needs to be cured, because sometimes it just means that the person who's experiencing it needs a little extra time or needs a little tenderness and affection, needs to hear something validating, or just wants to, switch gears and do something else for a little while. And I'm very grateful for the fact that I had this experience with this man, because he is the person that I learned this from. He allowed me to see that side of him where he clearly didn't see his erectile dysfunction as a medical issue that brought him too much shame or something that he wanted to medicate and course correct immediately. It was something he was able to turn into a bonding moment between us, despite the cliches we often see on TV or we see in books and movies and stuff. And that was a really nice example of what sex can look like when we're not trying to treat people like they're disordered or not constantly medicating every imperfection away.
Yeah, it really reminded me, actually, there is a scene in a film, I can't remember the name of it, with Jake Gyllenhaal and Anne Hathaway, and it might be around the first time they get together. It's a really lovely film, actually, and he isn't able to get an erection at first, and she and again, I think he's a little bit embarrassed by this, and she just actually, I remember in the film, it's a really lovely moment because I think she just gives him like a shoulder massage, and she actually explains to him sometimes our minds might want one thing and our bodies are just saying the complete opposite, and it's just knowing your body. And again, men can get so embarrassed, I think, when things like that happen, or if they can't get an erection straight away during sex, and again, it's just knowing that sometimes our bodies react differently, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer as well.
Yeah, that does sound, I think that's Love and Other Drugs, no?
Yes, it is. It's a great film. One of my gay friends told me about that film, and because he said there's a really hot scene between Jake Gyllenhaal and Anne Hathaway. You need to watch it. But yeah,
I get that. That's a great example of how anything can actually, you have the choice of turning any uncomfortable moment into a bonding moment when you are with a partner that you have, that you're exploring that kind of connection with. And unfortunately, it's because of a lot of the conditioning we get externally from the world outside and from society that those moments don't often happen. And we instead learn to disconnect from the other person because we hear all these ideas of, oh, he's clearly not attracted to me, or why is my body not working the way it should be? And you disconnect. But if you sit with the discomfort of not being perfect in that moment and talk to the person or initiate some other form of activity that allows you to relax and get comfortable in the moment again, then it can just bring you closer. Sex isn't something that just goes from, kissing to foreplay to oral to penetrative play. Like that linear expectation is just absolutely destroying sex for so many of us.
well, especially, yeah, if we look at, say, porn, and even really, if we look at a lot of it, again, as you say, in TV and film, it has unrealistic expectations. I think one of my favourite films, and again, really unrealistic expectations, is 9.5 Weeks with
Oh, yeah.
Basinger and Mickey Rourke, and I loved that film. And I watched it when I was far too young to be watching it, and I think it gave me unrealistic expectations about sex. But yeah, so just going back to Sangra as well and the work that you're doing. So again, you started with the website, and there's three of you, isn't they, who run the website and the blog?
Yes, I run the company with both of my partners, Ashish and Shweta. The three of us have been a polyamorous couple for about 7-8 years. So the sex ed was initially my thing because I was already in that line of work. But if it hadn't been for Ashish and Shweta, I think it would still be a very small scale Instagram account that was, very neatly putting content out there every week. But thanks to them, they sort of saw the need for these conversations, and they had a lot of ideas on how we can make a bigger impact and hold larger conversations. And eventually it became all three of us running the company together.
Oh, so it really is mixing business and pleasure, and it's worked to your advantage as well.
Yes.
And just when you touched on as well creating your own brand of sex toys and lube, how did that come about, and how again do your products sort of differ from, say, the mass-produced ones that are on the market that you can get hold of?
So there's a bit of a funny story to this one as well. This actually started when Ashish and I had made an attempt to order a strap-on online. And at the time, there were no designs available on the Indian market. So we had to order from, one of those big e-com aggregators where they have a bunch of different brands selling, and it comes imported into India. And typically you pay up front, and you don't necessarily know if customs will allow the package into the country. So there is a chance that you will pay the full price and not receive the package at all. So it was one of those really risky things we decided to do because we really wanted to explore this. And when the product finally arrived, it was in extremely graphic packaging that just completely turned us off. So we looked at the box and we were like, well, that's quite the mood killer. And then we opened the box, and the dildo from the strap-on set itself was the size of my forearm.
Oh my God.
So it wasn't a realistic product for, I wouldn't even say experts in this area. It was something that Ashish and I both looked at and we were just terrified. And the harness had the opposite issue because it was something that was, the straps were really flimsy in the sense that they would keep sort of loosening when I would try to wear it. There weren't any steady buckles on them. And they were very clearly also meant for someone of a very small stature. And that's when we realized that a lot of the products in the market, especially when they're being imported into India, are typically made in China. And that also means that a lot of the products being made there are designed with Southeast Asian bodies in mind. And so sometimes something like a harness is not going to be adjustable to, the average Indian body necessarily. So it was when we got that product and we saw how every aspect of it just felt so wrong for us, from the packaging to the product sizing itself. We just sat down and we said, is this something that we want to take a crack at? Is this something we would ever want to try? And so we did some research. We spoke to a couple of people who were likely to have tried similar products, and they highlighted a very similar sort of gap in the market in India for these products. And so the strap-on actually ended up being the first thing we manufactured in India, because we found an excellent partner who's a wizard with silicone. So we got to work with him to design a dildo that, the sizes made sense for Indian customers. We figured out what kind of colors they would like best. We realized that discretion is more of a priority here than for people to see something that is anatomically correct or that looks like a body part. So we leaned heavily into the discretion aspect. We leaned into packaging that also showcased that it's easy to get these products to your house without it raising any eyebrows. And we designed a harness keeping the average Indian body's waistline in mind as well, and making sure that it's adjustable but also sturdy with good buckles. So I would say that one of the reasons I can quite cockily say that our catalog stands apart in the Indian market is because we've built this community that started with, sex ed content first. We have a bunch of people around us who have gotten so comfortable with talking to us about sex and sexuality and their very specific needs that they are also extremely explicit when they give us their feedback. So when they try out products or when they request new products for our catalog, they're very direct on what they're looking for. They have some level of experience with imported products, and they know that there's a specific feature that doesn't work for them or specific sizes that don't work for them. And they tell us exactly what they're looking for. And that has helped us sort of fine-tune the kind of products we pour our manufacturing energy into, because we have direct information from the customers on what they're looking for. So that's really helped us set things apart. Even when it's the lube or the other massagers that we've come up with, all of it is born from so much feedback from people. Even if they, like with the lube story as well. When we first launched our lube, people really liked it, but there were a handful of people who said that it gave them a slight burning sensation. And that obviously is an immediate red flag, because why should an intimate product make you feel that way? So we started tweaking the formula of the lube, and we sent those people samples of the new formula until we got it right. So until we didn't have their complete approvals on the viscosity, the color, the scent, the feeling of it all, we then took that complete approved formula and made that the current formula of the lube that we sell. And in doing so, now we have a bunch of people who started off as angry with us because they didn't like our lube, and now they're just very enthusiastic beta testers, So I think it's just that proximity between the team that runs a brand and the people who are actually purchasing it themselves, and that direct conversation between them, that has just completely changed the game for us, because now I can with such confidence say what people are looking for in India.
Yeah, and also because you've got a passion as well of, around sex and having these conversations about sex, and you want it to be perfect for everybody. You want everybody to have a great experience. And just as you were saying then, just the customer feedback and having that personable approach with customers, it's really important, because how many times have any of us as consumers got a product and we've not been happy with it and not really got, when we have tried to give feedback, we've not really got the feedback that we wanted, or just been ignored. So again, just having that one-to-one approach, it's going to make people feel more special as a consumer, and they're going to want to come back, and they will trust you, and especially around products that are to do with sex and sex toys, because you do want something that works for you ultimately.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because I think, say, if you had had this conversation with me 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't completely realize how candid people were willing to be with me. And then I was at a work event, and someone in the crowd recognized me as, not just a team member, but as one of the founders of Sangya. And they came up to me and said, "Hey, do you have a minute?" And I said, "Yes, I do. Is everything okay?" And they said, "This is about your Essex dildo." Now, here's the thing. When I'm using it on my partner in missionary, it feels great. But the second I turn my partner over and I'm using it in doggy, the sensation changes. How can we fix this? And I was like, I haven't even caught your name yet. I don't even know if we've met before. What is going on? But this person just, zoned in, really focused on me, was like, how can we change this? Because I want to give my partner a better time. And I think we can do this together. And yeah, it's just so hilarious to have these moments in my life where people just have absolutely no filter with me and they tell me exactly what they're thinking.
But again, it's what we forget about sex. It's the fun of it, isn't it?
Yes,
When we're having stories with friends or people we confide in, it's just sometimes the absurdity at how funny that something that I guess everybody's doing it, aren't they? And yet it's just there's so many funny stories I think I've heard in the past. I'm just thinking because my family, like my mum's very open about sex from a young age with myself. In fact, I think she was the one who introduced me to 9.5 weeks. But yeah, and then again, I've got 2 sisters, and my poor brother as well. He just does not want to hear any conversations like this at all. But we've always been very open, and I think just having again this dialogue and these conversations, because it does then make you feel more comfortable when you are with a partner, and if you want to be able to, as I said earlier, it is all ultimately about trust, isn't it? When we're having sex with somebody. And just again, going back to the work that you're doing, I know you touched on it quite early on in the conversation, but with social media and around censoring, and of course it is important because a lot of younger children are being able to access the internet, but I think with the work that you're doing and having something that's more educational, how do you find it around things, for instance, like Instagram, when accounts get shadow banned or works getting censored because of certain dialogue that you use in posts?
It is extremely tricky and heartbreaking, and I wouldn't say that we've quite figured it out yet, because I do think meta platforms are sort of turning the heat up on censorship even more than they used to previously. So a lot of strategies to getting around it would be just self-censoring, where people would deliberately make typos in sexual words and terminology, or they would just use other symbols to blur out certain letters. And that worked for a while, but now I think Insta has been able to build an algorithm that is able to detect these words being used even when typos are involved, or even when there are certain symbols used to blur the word. And that does make this conversation incredibly tricky. And I do also see that there are vastly different levels of tolerance across countries as well. For example, I get ads for lingerie brands from other countries all the time. And sometimes those will have varying levels of nudity, right? So those are ads, those are sponsored posts. I'm not following the brand account at all, but I'm still getting semi-nude content on my feed. But at the same time, in India, if I post very similar images, and that's just a stock image that's being used to talk about safety in the bedroom, that post can still get flagged because of the image that's being used as a background behind the text. So it's a little difficult to sort of reconcile with this, because effectively we have an algorithm that is censoring things so aggressively and blatantly without pausing to understand the intent behind that content, that you find yourself desperately searching for loopholes in the system as well. But I do think that it's also been heartening to see that despite these pressures and despite the way the platforms operate, the people consuming this content and people who are interacting with it most are so excited to continue championing it that it is getting a little easier to sort of challenge shadow bans or to challenge when Insta takes your content down or restricts your engagement because it deems you as, having violated community guidelines. All those little things are something that I can challenge to some extent because of the community support. And I think it is becoming very evident too that there needs to be some reduction in the dependence we have on these spaces for education and awareness and community building. Because there's too much power in the platform itself to decide whether or not you get a chance to build that community. And so I feel like more offline work needs to happen. There needs to be more offline archives as well and resources as well, so people can access this no matter what the future of the internet looks like. And it's been very interesting to be able to sort of build that power for ourselves as well, and to reach a point where we can now say that yes, we are going to be venturing into offline spaces as well, because we are now working on books, we are now working with translators so that we can take the content we already have and have it translated to regional languages for other Indians in other states to be able to read it. And we're aiming for a more 360-degree sort of approach, so that if something does go wrong with meta platforms, then that won't single-handedly shut down the access that people have been gaining towards this kind of information over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and social media, it is great. I've used social media for a lot of my work. I've made some incredible contacts. I mean, even just like yourself having this conversation today, it was purely by fluke that I found the work that you do in India through the Global Indian Network and the work that I've been doing with them. And yet, again, social media platforms, they can go down at any time. We can suddenly lose our pages, and so many people, I guess, rely on things like Facebook and Instagram. So I think just having your own platform, as well as you said, say like your website, and also being able to archive things, it's not completely lost as well. You're always going to be able to access that information for your own business. So I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and I'm very excited to find out again what's coming in the future with Sangya. And so what is coming next for you? I know you've just touched on it then, but is there anything else that you can share, or any new products that you're working on?
Yeah, I think the future of Sangya is going to be accessibility. We're very content with the amount of information we've collected around pleasure the last couple of years, and now what we're really looking forward to is making that level of pleasure accessible to more people of different backgrounds and different identities across the country. For example, like I mentioned, right, we want to work with translators in the country, so it's not only something that's available to people who are comfortable with the English language. We want people to be able to read this in their native languages as well, so it feels closer to home and it feels more personal. We are working on remote controlled devices, so it's, it takes the pressure off of using your hand, it takes the pressure off of you using the toys all by yourself, and maybe you can pass the control over to a partner who's with you. So we're working on these little forms of accessibility, whether it's the toy itself, whether it's the lubes itself, because we're working on oil-based lubes and silicone-based lubes as well to have a proper range, so that regardless of what form of protection you like to use, or regardless of what forms of acts you like, you have at least one option available to you, so you can safely invest in that and explore pleasure with all the tools that you actually need. And that's the future we're building. We're looking forward to just expanding with the knowledge that we have, so that more people can be a part of the conversation and in turn be a part of deciding what the future of pleasure looks like in India.
And I love how you're making it accessible as much as you're trying for everybody as well, of all abilities or people who have got limited abilities, as you were just saying, then even with remotes, then you don't have to use the hands for pleasure as much. It's really, I guess, just that forward thinking of how you can help more people. And it's sort of linking back, isn't it, to your story about when you first bought the strap-on that was just not usable at all. And where can people find yourself and the company as well?
So the company is Sangya Project on Instagram. That's SANGYA Project on Instagram. And it's sangyaproject.com, our website, where we use the same name on Reddit as well. And Reddit is clearly a platform where we're able to have a lot more open dialogue than a lot of other platforms. So yeah, those are some of the places that you can find us.
Well, thank you so much, Tanisha. It's been incredible speaking to you today, and I can't wait to keep up to date with everything that you're doing with Sangya. And thank you for the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Shireen.